Okay. A very good afternoon to both of my esteemed panelists for today's event. This is a first of a kind Politica's event, which is on the virtual discussion that we're holding. So previously, we used to invite panelists to come over and discuss about topics. But this is the first time that, because of the sui generis nature of the pandemic, we've gone online. Today's topic would be about the state's apathy towards the migrant laborers during the time of the pandemic. And I have two amazing fellow panelists over here. My first panelist of the day would be Patralekha Chatterjee, who is a Delhi-based journalist, a photographer, and an author focusing on development issues. She has published in various major sites like The Atlantic, the Chicago Tribune, the Hindu, the Asian Age. And much of ma'am's work is exploring the linkages between health, environmental degradation, human rights, urbanization, migration, etc. She is an experienced media trainer and has taught in health and environmental journalism to postgrad students in both Jamia Millia University and OP Jindal Global University as part of the Media School, Journalism and Media School. And the second panelist of the day would be Professor Jadumani Mahanand. Professor Jadumani Mahanand is he's trained in political science, and he's obtained a MA and an MPhil degree in political science from the University of Hyderabad, and he's currently submitted his PhD at the Center for Political Studies at JNU. He has also published in various peer-reviewed journals and has edited books, and he often writes opinion pages on contemporary social and political issues. Now, so I guess that would be a brief heads about the panel discussion for today's event. Now, without further ado, I'd like to start off the conversation that's going to ensue for today's day. And ma'am, I'd like to start with you. So recently I had read your article on The Atlantic, and in that you had, and this is one theme of your article, you've spoken about how the vote bank, that a large chunk of the migrant laborers, they do not constitute as part of the vote bank that most of the parties, the political parties, would like to capitalize on. And the main reason being that their work, their vote is registered in their villages, so they rarely go back to do the voting. So would you see that as one of the main reasons that these laborers have been left abandoned by the state?
Yes, I think so, because you know, there's several reasons, but that I would say that the political aspect, the fact that, I mean, migrant population, the migrant workers, internal migrant workers, that is part of the vast informal sector. So that's one area of vulnerability. The migrant workers are among the most vulnerable of an already vulnerable sector, which is, the informal sector, which is really the 80% of India's workforce, is the informal sector. And this is, the informal sector is, to sort of unbundle that term, because it may sound like an academic jargon, but our country's infrastructure, which I pointed out in my essay in The Atlantic, is built on the backs of these workers. These are among our most vulnerable workers. Now, they remain vulnerable. One key reason is that, if you talked about the politics, of migrant misery, and this is not something which actually has started, or it's a very, very new phenomenon. It's a very old phenomenon. It's just that the COVID-19 has brought it out in the open. They're constantly on the move. And also, they're not a homogeneous population. We don't even know. I think recently there was a minister who actually admitted, the government admits, that we don't even have an actual figure for what is, and there are different types of migrant workers, and they're constantly on the move. There's some are longer term migrants, some are circular migrants, some are seasonal. And because they to and fro from cities to villages, from cities to cities, from work site to work site, and are very often registered back in their villages, and they don't really go back all the time to their villages to vote. I think that's one crucial reason. And of course, the the important reason why they're so vulnerable is because they are a subset, a very vulnerable subset of a vulnerable segment of the population, which is the informal workforce.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, ma'am, I can hear. Yeah. Professor Mahanand, your take
Yeah,
on this.
yeah, yes. Yeah, thank you for this question, Sahil. In fact, this is one way to actually critique the political parties in the current time, but where they, as to know that where they do not express their solidarity and sympathy for the migrant laborers, as rightly pointed out by uh, Patralekha. So I have not gone through her article, but just I was just uh, looking at looking through the other sources. Actually, migration is a big issue. It is not a new issue for the migrant laborer or the political parties to kind of capitalize their vote bank. But if the question is also right in a way to understand that whenever there are any crisis happens, political parties actually jump into and try to politicize. In fact, there is this Bihar election in front of us, but very sadly, none of the political parties actually they took up this issue and tried to politicize. In fact, there are laborers across India from Bihar, and if you go to any railway station, you find a Bihar migrant laborer. So, but it is not been politicized. I would also take this question in a different way. It is not because of the this corona pandemic lockdown. Also, there is an international and global pressure on each and every countries. So the situation is such where the political parties also kind of they do not know how to deal and how to tackle. And and yes, in fact, when we go to search at the data level, yes, migrants laborer are they are not permanent voters. Sometimes they are also seasonal laborers. They are also uh, kind in a way displaced people. Their location are not properly safe and protected. So of course this is one of the reason one could actually argue on this basis. But also I if I have a different kind of answer to this question, uh, to because of this this the coronavirus, the situation is such where actually people are not actually going into politicize it, rather they actually step back. It is a kind of a humanitarian crisis. Everybody are scared of this the virus. So that may be one reason to actually understand. Of course it is all the time the migrant labor are actually kind of are the worst sufferer of this lockdown. So, so political parties they do not have any kind of uh, proper sympathy for the worker. I would actually see in that way too, way not only as a kind of a voter, but also the situation is such there is no other means to actually kind of handle the situation. So yes, but if you go to some other countries like USA, where actually there is this community kind of mobilization where people are getting support from their own communities, and in fact in India also people they actually coming out and try to support the poor and the marginalized labor, and they are distributing food and so on. But the state, the political parties actually have failed to kind of address this question. Yeah, vote may be the one reason, but we do not have any state election or the parliamentary election or any local election to kind of speak in that way. Of course what Pratilekha was indicating, that is also true.
Okay, so this is to both the panelists, in fact. So one thing that I was looking at is how we, as and by we I mean all of us, the middle class group in India, we've always seen these migrant workers, and not only the migrant workers, the so-called downtrodden people in the society. We have always dehumanized them. We do not see them as people having aspirations, right? So we would rather think of us wanting
Correct.
to go to you. Hello, can you hear me, Professor?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was saying that we always think of us wanting to go to go abroad and do well and all that, but you don't want to see you don't see the migrant as someone who's having an aspiration of their own. Somewhat tend to dehumanize them from having an own mind to think through. So do you think all of that has also played a vital role in not viewing this migrant labor crisis as something which is humane?
Yeah, just to kind of to respond to this question, for example, Delhi is the capital of this country, and you see the brutality of the state and the police. I mean, the people from different parts of India who are living in Delhi, they are not even able to, go to their home. So I mean, and Delhi is also the capital where actually, all leaders, political leaders, educated, intellectual, it is known as the intellectual city in the country. But the way they have actually, treated the laborers, it is horrible. I mean, there is a clear cut division between the poor and the rich people, and I don't find any kind of, sympathy or empathy for the poor people, even those who call ourselves as intellectual or middle class, or the leaders. I mean, I would see in that way. That's why this is the situation is bad.
Yeah. Ma'am, your intake on this?
Well, I've lived in many cities in India. I think India as a whole, and not just India, but we are a very hierarchical society. I mean,
Yeah.
we should, face it. Extremely hierarchical, and there is a whole us and them divide. And while of course in Delhi we see this, but it's not just unique to Delhi. We've seen a lot of the um, a lot of the what you call the otherization,
Yeah.
also manifest in other cities, other big cities or small cities. I think it's the way the society is structured. And there is an elephant in the room over here, which is, caste. There is a definitely the bottom heap of the migrant workers. And again, as I said, the internal migrant workers, I don't think one should see them as a homogeneous community. There are different types, and different types of vulnerability. But the ones at the bottom are definitely, you'll find, historically marginalized sections like scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, over representation, or just large numbers. So I think that's it, sort of segs in with our otherization of historically marginalized groups. And as I said in the beginning, this crisis, it hit us because it's so visible. The images, the long march, and as I mentioned in my essay in the Atlantic, the long march could just go down as the defining image, of India's nationwide lockdown. But the problem as such is not something which started with the lockdown, nor will it end with the lockdown. So these people have remained, invisible. And largely the informal sector remains invisible. I mean, we don't really care what happens to them as long as they deliver, whether it's the manufacturing or whether it's services. So I think a lot of people, and I don't want to kind of stigmatize the entire middle class, because I mean, the very fact that we are having this discussion, and I think we are middle class. So we are middle class. So I think it is, we are India is a country of paradoxes. So yes, and we are an extremely hierarchical society, where those at the top of the food chain, due to historical advantages and other advantages, wealth, connections, whatever you choose to call it, social capital, are not necessarily treating others as, or do not see others as, equal. And you're absolutely right. Then let's say when a lot of us, if you go, whether we move, let's say, from Calcutta to Delhi, or Delhi to Bombay, or Bombay to New York, that is, mobility per se is not stigmatized. It's only mobility among certain sections, and we didn't really bother, as long as they delivered. The whole thing started because they started marching, and then there was a lockdown, and people suddenly didn't have access to their all this. Just 1 minute, huh?
Yeah,
So
sure.
that's the problem, and I think when one has to look at it, because I also believe that if we want to be a truly successful country, we can't completely ignore the working conditions of such a huge number, millions and millions of people. And we've seen now attempts to, dilute labor laws and things, which of course affects not just migrant workers, but all workers. So I think there are a lot of hard, you know, issues which we need to really look at.
Yeah. Ma'am, you focused on caste as one of the major things, and that brings me to my next question. So, here we have, so I've not read much about Ambedkar, and maybe because of the poverty of scholarship that exists in my mind with regards to Ambedkar's removal of social discrimination. But he argued that, in order to win this battle against, the growing disparity in the labor market, it's not only essential to kill capitalism per se, but also the very fact that there's been a Brahminization of society within our country. So, and do you think that, and Professor, also this goes to you because recently you had your journal published which is on Ambedkar's critique of recognition. So do you see that the Brahminization of society per se has warranted the laborers to be seen as the others?
Yeah. Shall I respond to this?
Yeah, Professor, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. This is really very, very important question. And as earlier pointed out, very nicely articulated by our co-panelist. But I take this question into a different level. Yes. Uh, According to Dr. Ambedkar, capitalism and Brahminism are the main enemy for the oppressed classes, and and during 30s he actually formed a political parties called Independent Labour Parties, and he was actually working with the labor class, not particularly Dalits, but the labor class composed of lower caste, the women, and the Dalits, Adivasi, and others. so so uh, and he very categorically says that Brahminism also in the in a Brahminical society, in the system of this graded inequality. So your status actually does matter when actually we talk about the labor issue, and it is very clear that how caste, labor, land relation, and occupation are entrenched in Indian Indian society. And when you talk about the labor issue, and we just cannot ignore this, or we cannot just escape from this understanding. However, people tend to actually ignore the entrenchment of caste when you talk about the labor. So it is very much visible when we come to post 90s, when Indian state adopted the liberalization policies. So actually there is a kind of sense of mobility for Dalits in particular after the liberalization. They actually kind of got some kind of job in various urban cities in the construction field and some other field, but they are also very badly kind of exploited by these capitalist forces. So this is one way to understand. But Ambedkar also kind of talk about this migration, since we are also in a way talking about the migration and labor issue. During 1930s and 40s, Ambedkar actually kind of encouraging in particular Dalits and the lower caste in general to kind of move into the cities, where you can find a sense of mobility and sense of then you can find some kind of job and employment. Because Indian society, it is a den of casteism, communalism, and so on. So it was the under this impression Ambedkar was interested and encouraging Dalits to go outside. But when we come to see the post 90s, and the situation is really bad. And take the example of this scavenging laborers, and there are various studies now. uh, Delhi, Bangalore, the five, six, this metropolitan cities. There is a study where actually Dalits are also segregated. I mean, urban cities where Dalits live, they are ghettoized, they are segregated. And if you see the scavenging communities, the laborers who work in this field, completely segregation. So there is no sense of social security, there is no sense of proper sanitization, and so on. Every week and every month there is a death of scavengers. So this is one. And also when we, since you talk about the Ambedkar, I can actually speak so much on Ambedkar, but I would just like to indicate 1 2 point, which is Ambedkar also talk about the lever, and it is not been explored so far. And he goes on to kind of explore the idea of lever in India. It is caste, occupation, which is like very watertight compartment. He says it is not division of laborer but division of laborers. So all the occupation and the caste that is entrenched with each community identity are also entrenchment of labor. So it is so difficult to kind of away from this and understand labor as a kind of an isolate as an independent category. It is not an independent category, rather it is also kind of very socially culturally entrenched. So then when we look at some of his policies when he was in Bombay Legislative Council in 1928 to 1938, so actually he formulated labor policies in the domain of state, and it should be the responsibility of state to kind of take the public issue to him was education, health, and many other issues. So, and in 1942 to 46, when he was a labor member in this legislative council in British India, he actually drafted so many labor policies for the laborers. It is a wonderful document. It is yet unexplored document. So I was going through some of the debates that he was having with at that point of time. So he formulated something like called the social security that we are talking today, the laborer for women's, I mean insurance for women, then maternity leave for women, maternity benefit leave for women, the life insurance, and he was talking about the health, public health, and all this policy, labor security, and the insurance for labor. Actually, it should go to the state, and it should be the responsibility of state to kind of protect them and give a sense of social security. I mean, when we understand this Ambedkar, ideas and commentaries on the labor, it is really interesting, and it is actually in a way uh, pro labor, not pro labor. It is actually for the laborer that actually he was talking about. The question is also that you have asked. It is, we just cannot see capitalism and Brahminism in differently, but we can also see that how Brahminism also in a way use capitalism in Indian context. For example, if I take this question to a different level, who are the people are capitalists in Indian context? It is of course actually this, because of this caste system and the Brahminical system that supported the capitalist in India to flourish. So it is not easy answer, but actually very complex, and the society that we are living, it is very hierarchical. So I would see that Dr. Ambedkar idea of labor and that present the crisis that we are facing would actually offer so much to kind of understand, at least if not we can take as a policy. Yeah, I could say in that way. Thank you for this question. Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am, your intake on this would be?
Well, I'm actually not an expert on Dr. Ambedkar, though I'm a great admirer, so I wouldn't, I don't think I could add anything to specifically to this. But one thing I've noticed that it's in a hierarchical society, what happens is that people, it's also about the rights awareness. I mean, recently I was talking to some migrant workers who were boarding buses, to take them to their villages, to the railway station, and from where they would get into the Shramik trains. And what was interesting is that while we have been writing a lot and talking about how the migrant misery, and we've been seeing images, many of them, they themselves, this was of course not the most vulnerable section. They were not that antagonistic towards the employers who hadn't paid them wages, and they kind of accepted it. it's almost like being fatalistic. So I, saying wo bichara wo kya kar sakte hain. So I also, of course, this attitude will not be uniform. It depends on, from where they are
Yeah.
coming. So I think it's also a function of the rights awareness. Like, you take a state like Kerala, which actually treats its migrant workers, they call them guest workers, very well. And the migrant workers do not want to go back in many cases to their
Yeah.
home. So I think it's also, a function of many things: education, human development, the land, the rights consciousness seems to be, especially in the northern India, and the what we call the Hindi heartland, the rights consciousness is much less than in many other parts of India, which are more you educated. So I think that's also function. I mean, yes, of course, people are exploited, but I think one big challenge is when the exploited themselves start seeing kind of they may object to the extremes of exploitation, but exploitation per se they begin to normalize. So I think somewhere that there's a problem. This is also a problem we have to address it. That you have to be because I think this is not even from a very self-interest point of view. In the long run, this is not going to help anyone. It's not going to help the country go. And recently, I did a column on, actually it was on the dilution of labor laws, not directly linked to migrants. But, if you look at the countries which have done well, which are uniformly, even from a successful capitalist countries, like say East Asia, they, of course, there is a hierarchy, but um, they don't deny their laborers minimum facilities. Now, recently we've heard of people, the minimum facilities are not there. So I think this business of, keeping people without, I mean, a lot of the migrant workers, they have absolutely, they're not on the payroll. You should hear them talk. Been talking to many of them, over creaky phone lines, when they were in their shelters, not even the most basic facilities. And I think this way the country if we want to be a superpower and economic power, I don't think we can ever be if millions and millions of people stay. So even an interest, there's also an interest, a self-interest argument to treat people better.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, correct. Just to add one point here,
Yeah.
on the migration, actually there are so much research on this migration and caste. And if I was in Hyderabad during 2015-14. So as a student, I was, because I come from Orissa, so there are many bricklines worker, particularly from the western part of Orissa, and we were as a student kind of, trying to rescue them. The situation is really horrible, even within the worker, those who are from lower caste and the so-called the OBC group and the Dalit. Even you can see there is sense of division among themselves. Even they are working outside of the state, and forget about the owner of this bricklines factory. So it is like a bonded labor. I mean, it is not only case in Hyderabad, but also several places where this migrant workers, the seasonal migrant workers, they go for bricklines factory. So I could actually share this experience, and it is so much visible even today and also there are some cases now coming up from Bangalore and the Chennai. So I mean, when we understand the labor and migration issue, our social status and the caste, it plays an really very in a negative way, at least for those who coming from the lower caste. Yes.
Yeah.
If I may point out something over here,
Yeah.
because I write on development, caste, of course, is a key factor, which, as we have discussed. But the other issue, and which is again not really adequately stressed in much of our discourse, is that, I mean, which other emerging superpower has also the largest, millions and millions of people who are, for instance, illiterate or semi-literate. So part of the vulnerability is the complete lack of options. You can't, I mean, you talked about, middle class people, or people, who migrate, people who migrate out of choice, and who have, kind of portable skills, which are in demand in metropolitan cities within India. India, and I about and
Ma'am, your voice seems to be cracking. Hello?
that use
Hello?
of
Hello?
can you hear me? I can.
Ma'am, can you hear me? I think it's my net.
Some problem has occurred.
Professor, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
I think it's from ma'am's end. She's gone off from the.
I think she's coming. Yes, she came. She joined again.
Okay, ma'am, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. I think, ma'am, your internet went like beach mein.
Yeah, okay. I don't know what happened. I think the internet. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, ma'am.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So, do you want me to repeat the thing
Yeah, ma'am, if you could please, because I didn't capture any of that.
Yeah, so I was saying that we have talked a lot about the caste angle, and which is of course an extremely important angle, but the other angle is the overall sense of their level, right? Very few other countries which are aspiring to be emerging superpowers have millions and millions of people who are totally without any education, without literacy altogether, or semi-literate, haven't even finished school. Now the cohort that we are talking about, the most vulnerable of migrant workers, they really have, some of them have no basic education. So the problem is their vulnerability. Again, the fact that most of them come from these states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Orissa, Jharkhand. These states are also extremely weak in overall human development. So the problem is also of the vulnerabilities compounded by the fact that they have no options. So this is a dramatic economic success in the last few decades. We haven't actually focused so much on human development as compared to many of our other peer countries, even compared to like little Sri Lanka. So this is something. If you are going to let millions and millions of people uh, have without the basic minimum education, they will not have choices, and if they don't have choices, they will be open to exploitation, much more exploitation, along with their historical disadvantages. So I think this is also one area one must focus on, that you have to give people choices, so that there was a reference to bonded labor. What kind of people become bonded labor? People who have no choices.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yes. Yes. Correct. It's a very correct observation. Yeah. In fact, it is happening in, at least in my observation and my reading and my experience. I have seen this bonded labor in Bricklin's factory because of choices. Yes, of course, the social security question, the question of freedom actually come into play here. So yeah. Yes.
Yeah, ma'am, and so like this is my own personal observation, and I feel that we have somewhere misunderstood this whole migrant labor concept. So we, as an assumption, we think that the people who come to the urban areas, they're poor, they're homeless, they're hungry, and they don't share. And this is again going back to the point of aspirations. So, now I feel that that's where we as a community have gone wrong. And, and this is coming from me, who is always on social media. You see these people talking about how we are heartbroken about the situation. And, this deadly virus being a huge rhetoric that's being used across the social media uh, platforms about the migrant laborers. Now, I actually happened to talk to a few of them, and they told me about their life is much beyond just earning those 500 rupees to 1,000 rupees a day. Their work is not just limited to those 8 hours, and that's exactly not why they came to the city. They're the so-called laborers that we've taken for granted all these years, their aspirations vary a lot from just toiling their day throughout. So most of them, in fact, like a lot of them did not leave their villages because they were starving. They came here looking for a better life. So our misunderstanding has been about them being poor, but that's not exactly the case, right? And I think that very aspiration has been hit of coming to an urban city and having a better, improved life. With the way the whole pandemic has turned out, I think that very aspiration would be chronically hit. And how do you, both the panelists, see this moving forward? Do you think post the end of the pandemic, do you see that the workers would be returning back, and you would see that the normalcy that we used to see before the pandemic, would that be happening again, or do you see a completely new outlook towards the labor population?
I think I think they are very poor. I don't think. I mean, every human being has aspirations. So it's not a question of that they are because they're aspirational, they are not poor. It's all relative. I mean, mobility is about moving to a greener pastures. So it's not a binary like poor and non-poor, but it's aspiring for a better life is part of being human. So I think and their relative degrees of poverty or aspiration. So yes, I mean it's a kind of you could say it's a truism to say that everybody aspires. Of course everybody aspires, but as I said, because we are a hierarchical society, we may not recognize other people's aspirations, but the poor aspire to be less poor, the less poor
Yeah.
aspire to be middle class, the middle class aspire to be upper middle class aspire to be rich. So aspiration is just it's a part of human condition. And yes, I mean, if we want to freeze frame people conveniently and saying they should not have aspirations, that's a social construct. But I think every human being, even the most destitute, they aspire. It's just they want to move to a better state. And what is a better state will depend on where they are from, right? So I think yes. And as far as whether they will go back or not, I think right now, at least all the people that I spoke to, they wanted to go back home, because they've really given up on the state as such. And by state I mean the government apparatus in general. And so the immediate thing is to go back, because like they said, agar marna hai to hum ghar pe hi marenge. And again, I think when we talked about students stranded in different cities in the world, we recognize their desire to come home as legitimate. So I don't know
Yeah.
why we sort of are questioning other people's desire to go home. Now it may or may not be rational, because but but I think after a few months some of them will go back. And to what extent I think right now the real enormous challenges are there in rural India now, in parts of eastern India, for instance, which has been hit by, like Bengal and Odisha,
Yeah.
been hit by the cyclone Amphan. All the sources of livelihood are gone, the paddy fields, the crops. So rural India, it will not be very easy. So let's see what happens. But I think there's a huge economic challenge looming ahead, and it's something we cannot insulate ourselves from it. We can't say, oh, we are middle class and we don't care, because if the economic distress becomes too acute, I think there will be huge social unrest, and which affects all of us. So again, this is something I think one must understand, that the social contract, about social stability and lack of unrest is in everyone's interest. It's
Yeah.
not just something we are doing for the poor. We're doing it also for ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Professor Manand, your views on this?
Yeah, since you talk about the aspiration and choices, it is really important to understand in the context of labor. And I would kind of bring another kind of category, which is also uh, something called the well-being of labor. So when we understand the labor and the migration issue in this context, so at a theoretical level, we also talk about dignity of labor. I mean, when we understand the how labor are kind of brutalized by the state and the police in one side, and another side the state as a whole mechanism, whether it is administration and the healthcare system and the police, even the political parties, the ruling political regime in particular, they actually failed to address this pathetic condition. I mean, you can see when this lockdown declared, within few hours, there are some arrangement for the rich people, and they can actually travel. But as far as the poor people are concerned, there are no arrangement. And after the post lockdown, we can see the the clear cut segregation and division between the poor and rich. So it is not necessarily about the social location of the laborers, but also in general, as a labor, as a migrant labor. As we study Indian constitution, somewhere Indian constitution also provide the sense of dignity to each and every citizen of this country. And labor, as rightly pointed out earlier, that labor also constitute and provide, and to the nation as a whole, in a construction of nation in a different way. So I mean, so when we actually understand their contribution to the construction of nation and society and so on, so where is the sense of dignity for them? I don't find anywhere that actually they feel the sense of dignity and they are dignified in a way. So I mean, and dignity and choices, freedom are, this is human values, and they as a human, as a citizen of this country, somewhere actually we losing that sense of spirit. I would add this much to this question. Yeah.
Professor, you spoke about how the laborers are losing a sense of dignity and human values. Do you see that
Yes, of course.
snowballing into a major unrest tomorrow in terms of the laborers?
Yes, of course. They, I mean, what kind of respect they
Right.
get? You see, they don't have any respect. Whenever, whether how they are brutalized by police. I mean, the police, they are trying to actually fool them in a way. And what kind of facility provided by the state, or various state government and the central government? I have not been to any other places, but what I am trying to understand through reading various article and reports and trying to follow through the news, but I can make this sense that there is vulnerability at their end, and they are really victimized by the state brutality. And recently our finance minister announced this policy. I mean, I don't know how it is going to actually reach to them. And our opposition parties and the NGOs and the civil society also in a way not able to address this question and not able to pressurize the question. This is one. And second, also we can see the authoritarianness in this present regime. Even if there are economists who are actually suggesting to government that you should give money to them in hand, but this government is completely kind of a authoritarian tendency, is not willing to listen to the civil society NGO. I mean, I don't understand that what this government is trying to do.
Yeah. On that note of how the government has reacted to the situation, you see, one of my friends, he lives in Bangalore, and there was this huge cluster of laborers who were left unattended by the government, and a major bridge between how work needs to be done by the government and the work that's reaching the ground level, that's the laborers, has been done by the civil societies or the NGOs. So what exactly would you see the role of the NGOs would be going forward from this? Like right now, they have been producing a lot, they've been helping a lot in terms of giving aid to the workers. But going forward, how do you see the role of the NGOs evolving? Ma'am, if you could just.
I think it's not just in the discourse, the migrant discourse, but in any discourse. I think I mean, why do we elect a government? Why do we, why do we have ministries? Why do we have departments? The major role has to be state, but of course, civil society, private sector, they can all help. But in terms of policies, in terms of enforcing regulations, that is the state's job. The civil society we have seen a lot of excellent civil society initiatives, but you cannot outsource governance entirely to civil society.
Yeah.
I mean, as we speak, I'm just seeing right in front of me, the computer screen, that I think today, yeah, it's today, they're talking about migrants in screening line for trains are hosed down with disinfectants. Right, this is in Delhi. This is happening in Delhi. and the municipal South Corporation is doing this, and they're facing a lot of flack. Now, this is again, sort of goes back to this the issue of dignity. I mean, how would we react if we were, let's say,
Yeah.
when we go to the airports, and if we were hosed down in Terminal 3,
Yes.
would we, I mean, is there any likelihood of that happening? It's the exact
Yes.
same argument, right? When we come back from abroad or somewhere else, or so it's a question, yes, the government of the day or the previous governments you can blame, but as a society also, I think we should introspect on what, I mean, we accept, the kinds of things we accept. In no other democracy you could get away with that without facing a
Yeah.
lawsuit. Like the other day I heard that in Gurgaon, which is in some luxury condominium, they said maids, domestic helpers, cannot touch the bell, when they the elevator, they cannot touch the button, right? Now, this is ridiculous, because yes, you can say that no outsider should touch something with their hands, in which case you keep a table or something and put a hand sanitizer and make every single person, go through this. But I think somewhere along the way and over the years, it didn't start today or yesterday, we have normalized this completely, different ways of treating human beings.
Yeah.
In other countries, you cannot tell, I mean, in Thailand or anywhere, you cannot tell, say, a nanny or somebody who works for you, that use a different elevator, and you cannot touch this button and you cannot touch that button. In no democracy you can do that without, actually establishing what is the argument for it. So I think it's not just having a law. We have different lifts, different elevators for different people. So I think somewhere along the way as a society, we have normalized huge discriminations which actually cannot stand in any other democracy. It just will not stand. You'll have a class act, suit. So I think it starts with that dignity. So whether there will be a massive uprising, I don't know, because the state is pretty brutal. And again, I'm not talking about just the present state, but so I think, and migrant workers, which has been pointed out before, are not always united, and there are lots
Yeah.
of fissures and divisions between them. So it may be difficult, but I think it's in all our collective interest to give a better deal to people. I mean, they are just, the service sector, I mean, they're building the country. The construction workers, the delivery boys, the people who work in beauty parlors, somebody, who works for you. They're all, and then as many middle class households are now noticing, if we when during the lockdown, what it means when all of these people are not available, their services are not available. So I think it's a question of ultimately not just what sort of an economy we want to become, but what sort of a society we want to
Yeah.
become. And yes, we have all excellent laws, but we have to just implement it. And I think it's the government, I mean, the enforcing basic regulations which exist on paper.
Yeah.
Correct.
Professor, your take on this?
I have already actually pointed out this, but to add something more about more on the dignity of labor, I mean the citizen, how citizens are kind of betrayed, that we can see in this present lockdown. Every citizen has right to work, right to speech, right to do whatever they want, but and it is all the time the poor and the marginalized communities, they actually kind of at the end they are the worst sufferer of any calamity, whether it is calamities, whether it is this coronavirus or any other things happen. So uh, it is not only about the citizenship entitlement or the state responsibility. It is also somewhere actually lies on the civil society and the society at large, that how you treat other people as equal human being. So that is where actually we are missing so much. uh, uh, and this present situation, uh, there are cases that where this people are particularly the poor people are kind of the way they are treated, it is unacceptable at all. I mean, we as a kind of citizen, we should kind of express our solidarity, sympathy, empathy for the people, and whatever possible way that can be helped, we should do that. But the case is really different. I mean,
Yeah.
and people are kind of they make fun of this disease. So this question actually leads us to understand our public healthcare system. The public healthcare system, it's supposed to be the responsibility of state to kind of enhance their facilities, but the case is really bad again. You see, after lockdown, when migrants workers are going into their home state, so then actually then there are cases now. So there are cases where people are actually uh, COVID positive. So then how do you actually, and this actually this lockdown actually exposed so many inadequacies and the inadequacies of our last 70 years democratic state, democratic government, whether it is healthcare system, whether it is labor policies, or whether it is social security of labor at large. So in particular, if I talk about the healthcare system, I mean, it is really, really bad at present. And and to kind of a question to our healthcare system, I mean, how we are also, you know, uh, uh, accountable, and also, kind of doing research on this line to kind of, bring uh, some kind of medicine for it. I mean, it is a big problem. No, mm, none of the state, whether it is none of the countries have actually evolved this or bring some kind of uh, uh, medicine for this, vaccine for this. But I don't know how Indian state or Indian healthcare system are serious about it. So,
Yeah.
and yes, and particularly when we understand the healthcare system, the post 90s, you could see that how this again this liberal policy, the new liberalization actually again demarcated the public healthcare, the private healthcare, and so on. So again, the poor people are actually sufferer at the end. So and for example, you see the other countries like Germany, they have actually kind of in a way control it. So because their public healthcare system is very, very robust and strong. So, but in case of India, it is very bad. So yes.
Yeah. Ma'am, you had spoken about how this problem didn't exist, like it did not start in the lockdown and it doesn't end like in the lockdown again. So, like this particular part of society, do you see that, which is like being discriminated towards the lower strand of the society? Do you see that as an effect of post 2014 right wing populism entering into the country, or is it like prior to that that it was embedded so much into our society?
No, I mean, the hierarchical, there are lots of problems we have had, social and economic problems since 2014. But I think would be an exaggeration to say that the, hierarchical society per se started in 2014, or the discrimination against migrants started in 2014. So or the informal sector started in 2014. So I think these are all legacy problems. These are pre-existing problems. But of course, when you have a calamity, like Professor just pointed it out, it basically all the fissures which pre-existing fissures, it just deepens it, and it just brought it out in the open. It's like you have a lot of warts in your body, and it's out there, visible for us to see. And a catastrophe like, the COVID-19 has brought this out. But I think this is a good moment for introspection, and I'm glad the issue of health was also brought up, because in a contagious disease, infectious disease, a virus really doesn't care about who you are, whether you're rich or poor or what caste, or when. So it's a question of, you can't you I visited Surat many years ago, when there was a plague, and it's actually the city. rejigged its public health system after the plague and completely, had a good health system. So I think this is also a moment when we must realize that you can't say migrants' health is different from, a general our public healthcare system leaves a lot to be desired, except in specific states like say Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So we cannot, if one set of people have an infectious disease, everybody is at risk. So I think this is a good moment for introspection, and I hope we will do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So just to add to on this, healthcare system, for example, this example, a little tricky example, but earlier I was talking about the manual scavenger issue, where actually it is not at all a national concern for the country. I mean, the every month you see a dead body of the scavenging community. So coming into this, corona and the lockdown issue. So I mean, this actually got a national attention at large. But what I'm trying to say is, when we talk about the healthcare system, I think, as rightly pointed out uh, uh, by our co-panelists, that it should be a national concern. It should actually be a public concern. So it is not necessary. It is not like who belongs to who caste and poor and rich and so on. However, uh, as we live in a democratic society, and where our constitution also somewhere, uh, talk about the socialism and inclusivity. So focus should be also kind of, the people who are not able to, who are not people who are kind of, at the bottom head, who are not able to, spend so much money, or who are marginalized. So a policy should be such where, uh, a healthcare system should be such where these people can actually get a minimum accessibility, a minimum kind of facility, so that uh, then we can say the democracy, and we can actually sense the sense of, security for all.
Yeah. Uh, okay, so ma'am, you had spoken about how you'd gone to Surat before the plague and how the healthcare system improved after the plague. So, do you see a similar sort of situation, evaporating throughout the whole of India, like post the coronavirus thing? And in the sense that not only that healthcare is improved, but also the social security net per se, it goes a major reformation.
No, I think you misunderstood me. I have not visited Surat before the plague. I was there
Okay,
only after the plague. But the
okay,
plague was very well known, and it was a watershed moment for the city. And what it did is, it actually realized that when you have an infectious disease, these artificial divides that we have, rich, poor, this caste, that caste, it doesn't really work, because germ, the virus or the bacteria, they don't respect these divisions. So
Yeah.
if there are people at risk in one part of the city, it will spread. So what they did is they rejigged the health system, and it became one of the better health systems, in Surat. But of course, Surat has also been affected this time, but due to a different set of
Yes.
reasons. I don't, I can't, I wouldn't say that the health system in general has improved all over the country. I think there's a lot which more needs to be done. I mean, for instance, one of the major issues, and which is I think is a real scandal, is, the PPE, the personal protective equipment. Many of our doctors, many of our health workers are still going in. They're on the front line, and without the adequate protective equipment. I think we still spend, we just about spend a little over 1% of our GDP, on public health. So I think that's like less than most other countries we compare ourselves to. So I think this has to improve. I think the private sector can play a part, but personally, my view is that the government, the state sector, has to be in the commanding role, as we have seen that, in this, at the end, at the end of the day, it is the public hospitals, it is who is really bearing the brunt of this,
yeah,
the government doctors. Private sector hasn't really played any major role, in addressing the issues raised, the health issues raised by this, uh, pandemic. And I think we must face fact that those, many of us, middle class, upper middle class, middle class, rich, or whatever we like to call ourselves, are vocal and visible, we are not the majority.
Yeah.
We are an emerging economic power, and there are millions of people who have been lifted from absolute poverty in the last 20 years or more than 20 years, and I think that's excellent. But millions of people still remain extremely poor. We must recognize them. Just because they're not visible or vocal or appearing on TV or on Twitter doesn't mean that they don't exist, and they cannot. So, there's a basic issue about access to affordable healthcare. If our medicines are priced, beyond their affordability, or if you make them pay, they just simply will not seek healthcare. So the private healthcare system, though, yes, they go there because our public healthcare system is overstretched and understaffed. We have to spend more, and it's not just spending more, because it depends on what you spend on. You can have a beautiful building. I mean, we have a lot of health and wellness centers, for instance, post Ayushman Bharat. But many of them, I wouldn't say all, some of it has definitely improved, are working suboptimally. They're not staffed. They don't have the necessary, the staff. They don't have doctors. They don't have health, multi-purpose health workers. So we have to do that, because we have to recognize that, I hope, and I think that has happened, that health is definitely on the high table of policy discourse. And I think we must keep up the pressure to keep it over there. And once the pandemic is kind of, I think it is here with us for many years, but in its acute form, when it is no longer there, I think we must pressure the government to prioritize health. And it's not just expenditure, as I said, also accountability. We must have minimum standards. You cannot say that, okay, let everybody, we will go to AIMS and everybody else goes to some, Ayush or Unani center. I'm not debunking Ayurveda or anything, but I think there has to be, equal access to the same kind of healthcare facilities. We have excellent private hospitals, but only for those who can afford it. So I think, and we must recognize that the majority cannot afford it, So I think that's something very basic fact. I mean, we do have, no matter what our aspirations are, we have to face the basic stark reality that the country as a whole has millions and millions of people who are below the poverty line, who cannot afford, they simply, they cannot even afford to pay for testing, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to have diagnostics which are, so ultimately it is the public healthcare system which has to really address these issues. And if we don't fund them, if we don't resource them, fill up the vacancies, pay people decent wages, ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, pay them. I mean, will we work for 5,000 and 6,000 rupees? So why should they?
Yeah. Professor Maharam, just a minute before I come to you.
Yes.
Ma'am, on a follow-up to that, if, say, India goes on from here prioritizing its healthcare, could that somehow catapult India into the superpower that it had always envisioned itself to be, which we haven't done historically till now so well, as exposed by the virus? Could this be a turning leaf in India's, overview in terms of in global politics?
Privatizing the healthcare
No,
entirely?
not privatizing the healthcare. I'm saying prioritizing the healthcare, because that's something we haven't done previously.
Yeah. That is what she was arguing on this line, that if we can prioritize the healthcare system, then there would be a sense of, security for the poor and marginalized people who are the bottom hand. And of course, there is a division, as she rightly pointed out, that uh, the rich people can afford and go to the private hospital, and the poor people, you go to the public healthcare system. It is such a bad situation, and we are also living in a country where the highly populated country, so our system are inadequate to take everybody into the account and check. So so uh, but I don't know. I can't even imagine this question, that if we correct our healthcare system, then in the coming time India would be in the global figure. Yes, of course, healthcare system has been one of the most important issue in a democracy, and in a democratic society, healthcare system should be taken by the state. But the situation, but the case is actually reverse. Now everybody kind of relying on the public, the private healthcare system, and where I'm not interested to comment on the doctors and the healthcare system in India in particular. But what I can see that people, it is people actually try to uh, speed up things, try to get the accountability, and they want to kind of improve their health as soon as possible, and there are so many other issues related to that which is not available, which is not actually kind of, people also kind of just distance themselves from the public healthcare system. However, there are people actually rely on the public healthcare system, but there is also sense of uh, uh, a distance, and they are going to private hospitals. So I don't know how this question is actually uh, I don't know how to actually formulate this question and actually think about the global power and taking healthcare system into the account. But of course, in a democracy, healthcare system should be in the public domain, and should, I mean, as she rightly pointed out, that only it is 1% of total GDP is spent on the healthcare system. This is really pathetic. This is horrible. I mean, and where more than 40% people coming from the poor background, coming from the marginalized background. And how do you actually address this question, the question of healthcare, where actually you spend only 1% of your total GDP? This is same on the government itself. I mean, I don't know how they are going to increase this.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing that we're running out of time, like I request both the panelists if you could give your final comments on this, and then we could wrap it up. So,
Well,
yes,
I'll
yeah,
I'll take on. I think I think we have to stop this obsession about becoming a superpower. I think let us first become a medium level. I think this is a. I
Correct.
mean, I'm completely amused by this because each one has a definition, and I think there's no magic bullet to becoming a superpower. No country has become a superpower overnight, and
yeah,
health is part of the basic minimum thing. It's one of the elements. Yes, but it's not the only element. You need education, you
yeah,
need infrastructure, you need many things. But I think it's a commonsensical logic that a sickly nation cannot become a superpower,
yeah,
or if it doesn't carry, especially with a population as big as ours, and also if there's illiterate population. But just health by itself cannot catapult you to a superpower status. But I actually question this fundamental obsession with becoming a superpower. I mean, we are so miles away from that I think first we have to reach a basic medium level. I mean, I'd be quite happy if you're at a medium level. I mean, I don't even like to use the word power, because again, power for whom? What if you,
Correct.
even if you become hypothetically a superpower, what does it mean? I think we have to sort of question this concept of who, when you become a superpower, what does it mean to that migrant worker or the person who's working in the brick kiln,
Yes.
or what does it mean? It's a better calling card for, say, upper middle class or rich, or people who are at the top of the food chain. So I think the point is we have so many miles to go, and there are many determinants to becoming, let's say, a successful country, like you say, a country like Germany, or even Thailand, or right now you look at Vietnam, so who are the countries which are able to take advantage? Now you see, now people are saying, okay, there's a lot of there's a lot of manufacturing. It should all come to India. But Vietnam is taking a lot of the things, and you have to see why they are taking, because they have an educated workforce, they have a healthy workforce by and large, and also then they give a lot of infrastructure, etc., incentives. So there's a whole package. I don't think it's one element, but as I said, I'm quite happy if India just junks its ambition of becoming a superpower and just gets to the let's provide basics for everybody, and then we can talk about superpower.
yeah. Professor Maan, and your final comments on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with her, and just add on and say that uh, uh, India considered to be the five largest, economic power, global figure in the world level. But as you see the condition now, we are not even able to, protect our migrant labor. And talking about the, global power, it's just a kind of, uh, I think we should think about that, how the citizen of this country should feel the sense of uh, dignity, sense of equality and freedom. They should freely exercise their democratic rights. So in that sense, I would say, if we are able to kind of give this kind of security and protection for the laborer, marginalized people, women, children, old men, uh, old female, then I think will that actually make the democracy substantive, democracy meaningful. On that basis, actually, we can imagine as a better society, instead of calling superpower or emerging power. Uh, 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 Also the healthcare system, also the education, and many other uh, uh, you know aspect that actually make a citizen, a society, and a nation better, rather than only talking about the global economic power. At the end, actually, it is not helping the poor and the large masses of the society. At the end, actually, it is helping the rich section of the society. However, one would disagree on, say, that no, this, the capitalism and the capitalism may help to the large section of society. I would actually disagree on that, and how it also kind of in a way to exploit people, the poor people and marginalized people. So I would say, let's realize and practice the democratic rights that available in our constitution, that make a society better and more democratic and inclusive, and provide a better sense of dignity to each and every individual and citizen. Yeah.
Yes, sure. So I guess, yeah, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank both the panelists for mining out some time from their schedule and, sharing such wonderful insights into the issue at hand. Thank you so much for now. I hope to again come in conversation with you again. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to